Hey, party people. How's it going? You can tell I'm from the 80s or from the 70s. 80s? I think it's 80s. Hey, folks. Welcome to Neurofeedback and Chill. I am your host tonight, Dr. Andrew Hill. If it's night for you, good evening. If you're watching this tomorrow morning or listening to it as you putter around and have coffee, good morning. And if it's some other time in the world for you, happy day to wherever you are. So Neurofeedback and Chill is our weekly live stream where we geek out on all things, often neurofeedback, a bit of biohacking. Sometimes we talk about aging or executive function or peak performance. So if that kind of thing appeals to you, do me a favor and grab that subscribe button. Something like half our regular viewers are subscribed. So I bet we can do better. And if you're so inclined, also give the videos on the channel a tickle. The algorithm gods seem to love that. So tonight I didn't have a topic prepared. I have a couple interesting things I'm going to dig into deeper over the next few weeks. There was a really great paper that came out looking at addiction in neurofeedback, specifically looking at metadata studies or doing a metadata study across several other studies, a review article. And it sort of examined the size of the impact across different types of neurofeedback and at a super high level found there was a significant impact on addiction, which we know if we've worked in neurofeedback or worked in the field of addiction and around neurofeedback, it can really dramatically accelerate benefits and recovery in a bunch of ways. But the paper deserved a little bit more of a deep dive, so I wanted to prepare something for you in the next couple of weeks. And tonight, I just wanted to hang out and do some neurofeedback and say hello. And our first guest of the evening, Radar Ashwood. Hello, Radar. How are you doing tonight? Nice to see you. So let me turn off my show title. And I'm going to do some neurofeedback tonight and just hang out with you guys and chat and answer questions. I may have some questions of my own. And I think tonight I'm going to do a compound protocol. So let me move my floating head off to the other side of the screen so you can see all the buttons. There we go. All right, so we're going to grab my client ID. This software is called QEEG, which is used for neurofeedback. It's one of the clinical software packages out there. All neurofeedback software that's any good is somewhat expensive, unfortunately, and that's one of the biggest limits is the cost of the equipment to do this work. The other big cost is knowing how to use it. If you want, I can go off on a rant about how often I'm asked what the best system is to use, and I mean, I can do good neurofeedback with almost any system. If you do the right thing with it, you get the right results. There are some systems that don't let you control what you're doing, and so you can't do as much. But if you know how the brain works and you know how neurofeedback works, you can often use whatever tools in front of you. So the tools don't matter that much, but I really like QEEG, the software here, because it gets out of the way so reliably. And it also has really, really fast timing. I also did some research with this QEEG software for my PhD, where I did a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, which I thought was pretty cool. And QEEG built a module to do that. So let me see. This is a C31 A1C4A2 protocol as a dual. I don't think I want to do a dual. I'm going to change the layout back to a 5 trace. And we'll do the default one. Okay, so C3A1 for not for 3 minutes. We'll do 12 minutes. 4 to 7. We'll do 14.625. Is that the right? Is that the eighth? Let me see if it lets me put that in. It did not. So 675 then. I always get confused. I can't do math. I was trying to divide out an eighth and I can't do it. All right. Is that going to work? Let's see. Just 17 point. Actually, it is 625. So maybe my QEEG doesn't have the quarter hertz enabled. Let's see, 2.5. Is that going to work? You can see how it turned pink. That means it's not liking one of my values. Huh. It's weird that it's letting me do an eighth for one of them, but not for the other. I wonder if there's a space in there. It doesn't like spaces. 14.625. There we go. I may have typed comma instead of period. Doesn't like that either. All right, so that is a C3. We're going to do a 24 to 36 inhibit, and we're going to set that up with auto goal thresholds so that every 30 seconds, the computer adjusts itself and puts itself next to where I am. And for each of the 3 frequency bands, it's going to put the comparison, the threshold, in a little bit of a different place. Just below things I want to go up, just above things I want to go down. And when my brainwaves stay doing those things, the game will run. And when my brain drifts in a different direction, the game will stop. And so what neurofeedback really is involuntary sort of operant conditioning, because the feedback you're getting, the audio and visual of the game, is not something you're controlling, something your brain is noticing, but your mind is not as much. All right, let's see. C4A2 is fine. I'm going to do 12 hertz, but I'm going to do it for only 6 minutes, just to evaluate how 12 hertz feels, because it's a little faster than I usually train. And then we got C3A1 to C4A2. That's just fine. Cool. Now I'm going to set myself up and do some neurofeedback. So tonight I'm using an old UWiz amp, little 4-channel prosumer amp. We got some wires, we got some paste, we got some questions. Radar Ashwood is saying, was Margaret Ayers the first ever neurofeedback practitioner? No, I don't think so. What year did she start? I'm not sure what year she started. Margaret did have a very interesting practice, and progressively longer and longer as she practiced, she moved into doing very specialized work. I believe she developed her own software in the second half of her career. And then a lot of her work was done with coma patients. She had a whole subspecialty focusing on coma patients and going to bedsides and doing neurofeedback with patients with those types of complaints. So she wasn't the first. I think the first, it depends how we define neurofeedback. The current stuff we're doing here, one could argue that Joe Camilla in Northern California was first in the mid 60s, early 60s. And then a few years later, Dr. Sturman in 1965 or 6 did the research with cats that sort of sparked off the modern techniques. So I would say the field of neurofeedback, the thing that we mostly do, these sort of beta manipulation protocols, we discovered how those things actually work, or some big aspects of how those things work, in the mid 60s. And that was Dr. Barry Sturman. And then a few years before him, Dr. Joe Camilla, who's at somewhere in Northern California, Berkeley, I forget where he was, where he was doing voluntary alpha training, sort of biofeedback based mindfulness stuff. And it was interesting, but it wasn't quite as powerful as the SMR that Dr. Sturman discovered, having the strong inhibitory tone kind of component. And it controls for seizure helps the brain become seizure resistant, helps with executive function, helps with sleep. So that was really Dr. Sturman. I would argue is sort of the person that discovered or created the first neurofeedback in the way that we do it mostly in the field. But there were some things happening before that. I think Doug Quirk actually did some work very early on as well in Canada. Most of the alpha theta stuff that was done with addiction and trauma and things was done in the late 70s and 80s, actually. So after that, So I think Dr. Camilla is probably the first official person, but I'm not 100% sure. You can look it up or ask ChatGPT and see what they say. All right, so get some wires on. This is a 1-channel protocol done in 2 parts. So we need 2 ear clips and 1 flat wire, and then I'll just move it because I don't feel like putting 2 wires in my head. So I'm untangling 2 ear clips right now before my cats notice and come steal them, because they will do that. There we go. And then just 1 flat wire is fine. There we go. Oops. Of course, the ones I didn't untangle are now extra tangled. Let me just take a moment to save future me the hassle of having to untangle these later. There we go. As an aside, electrodes, single electrodes used for neurofeedback come in various types. They're mostly the same, with the exception that the heads can be solid silver like these, or they can be tin, or they can be, sometimes you'll see coated like gold plated. Don't use the plated ones. Those don't work and they fail very quickly. Use a solid metal. Sometimes you'll see like a sandy gray colored metal, little pellets that are pressed. That's silver chloride. Those are good for DC coupled or infra slow electrode training. But we're using basic ones tonight, just basic silver. And you may not be able to see it, but the green one and the yellow one are different thicknesses. The green one has this silicone tangle-free material around it that helps it be rubbery, and then the yellow one is just Teflon coated, and they're all pretty tangly. So don't believe it when you see tangle-free on the products for electrodes. They're a little bit less tangly, but they're still tangle-full usually. So. All right. Hey, folks, I see some folks rolling in. Welcome to the chat tonight. Welcome to the live stream. If you're new, I am Dr. Andrew Hill. I'll be your host tonight, and we're going to do some neurofeedback now. So plugging into the amplifier, we're first going to put some ear clips on. And this is not a very big amount of paste. We'll have to scrape the bottom of the bucket here. All right. So what I'm doing is setting up 3 electrodes in my head to measure different locations on my head to pull electricity off of. And then off that stream of electricity, we'll filter out different brainwaves, different frequencies to measure. Because when you measure off of one signal, you don't just get one thing. You get all the brainwaves from basically down to 0 times per second up to about 35 or 40 times per second can be picked up. And you also get tons of environmental noise like 60 hertz wall power signal. You also get movement and blinks. You also get information from under wherever the electrode is and from everywhere else mixed together. But the stuff that's under the electrode is faster. It's instantaneous nearly. And the stuff that's from further away is lagged. So I'm plugging this in for a whiz amp. We use the red minus black for the channel. This is C3 minus A1. So A1 is left ear. That's the black one. The unspecified location goes into the ground. So we'll put that into the ground socket, which is green on this amplifier. There we go. And one on top of my head, which is going to be a C3 or a left-sided protocol. So let's see. Cool. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I had to stop and look at protocols for a second. I have a company called Peak Brain that does neurofeedback, if you don't know, and we do neurofeedback all over the world. And we have several offices, and each office has a few coaches in it. And those coaches all work with clients in person, but also virtually. And so most of our clients actually work from home. And that's left side. There we go. That's about C3. And so one of the benefits of having all of our clients work from home is we can support them whenever they need support. And that means that 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, our coaches are there to help you put wires on like this and help you troubleshoot your sessions, etc. But that also means that 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, coaches ask me for questions too. So let's see. So great questions, Radar. Thanks for your sharing. I'm curious, for those of you who are watching who do neurofeedback, do you do one thing at a time? Do you do 2 things at a time? Are you doing sequences of things like I'm doing tonight? What is your training style, or what is your training habit, so to speak? You might not know if you go to a clinic and do it. You might not have a clear sense of what they're doing. I would encourage you to ask lots of questions and learn, because a good neurofeedback clinic will teach you to read your brain maps and will teach you to understand why they're trying different protocols so that you can notice the effects a bit more, hopefully. Maybe not right away. At the beginning, it's not that important. People don't notice neurofeedback for 3 or 4 sessions, usually. But a handful of sessions in, there's this after effect, this lingering effect that starts to creep up. And as you repeat the protocol, the effect becomes stronger and longer lasting. So you have this opportunity to steer the effects that happen when you're doing neurofeedback. And I encourage you to tell the people you're working with, if you're getting some guidance, and you probably should, in my opinion, tell people you're working with your goals, your suffering, what you're experiencing day to day, not just the one thing you're trying to fix. And that will help people understand you a lot better. All right, so let me start my session. You know, I've threatened a couple times to do different game demos. Let's do highway today. I don't know if you guys have any desire to have me do any game demos. Let's see, our signals don't look great. They're initializing, but when they start off below the... Okay, and it should be finished initializing right about now. Yeah, that's not a good signal. What's going on? Oh, that's funny. My amp's, you see a little blue light? My amp's in HEG mode somehow. So Eager does not like when you disconnect an amp live. So I'm actually going to quit Eager. I'm going to unplug and replug the amp. And that should take the amp out of HEG mode. Yeah, I think it was still in HEG mode from last week's live stream. Now, let's see if Eager's smart enough to pick up my amplifier without restarting Eager. Oh, it is. Look at that. Cool. Hey, Kirk, my neurofeedback practitioner is pretty good. He is? Glad to hear it. Or she is? Glad to hear it. That's great. El Chatterino is saying, usually start with 1 and see the band order, behavior, and then from that, either work the site or move to a more likely site. Or area based on the behavior, i.e. forks, band gap issues, bundles. Oh, so you're using mostly signal characteristics to guide? Interesting. I mostly use After Effects. All right, so let me, you see we have some signals. They're a little noisy still, but once I sit still, the signals will settle down. But the bandpass filters below at 4 to 7, fit 14. Oh, it says 0.63. Oh, no, it rounds up. 0.65 is rounded in the screen. That's what it is. The height of the waveforms is tiny. So let me do some scaling. And on Eager, you would scale the top trace, which is the raw signal, tall enough where you can see it. You can see the quality of the signal. And this is fine. I'm moving and talking and blinking, so I'm getting a lot of pops on the electrode, but that's just movement noise. The average, if I hold still for a second, let's see what the average drops to. AVG. Yeah, it wants to be around 50 or 60. So I'm going to take the THR number. By hitting minus, I'm going to drop it down to about 100. What that will do is it'll clip out any blinks. When I move and I blink, you see how the squiggles are going crazy? Well, there's a little red line through them when that happens, and that will clip out the signals below so nothing gets filtered in that's noise. And now let me scale. I've deselected. Really important in Eager that you deselect by hitting enter a couple of times before trying to work on the whole page. So now anything I do will touch the whole page. So now we do F9, and that scaled the bands. You can see they jumped a little bit. And then F11. Oh, that's 12. F11. And then 9 again. And then 11 again. Cool. So what I did was I sort of auto scaled and auto thresholded the 3 filtered bands. I'm going to make this one manually bigger. So F9. And then minus. There we go. Okay, it's looking pretty good. To minimize the effect of movement on the raw trace, I'm going to play a trick, and that's scaling the raw band up a little bit. And that will add a little bit more of an aggressive high-pass filter. It'll move the high-pass filter from like 0.5 up to 1, which will drag the signal down a little bit. So I'm just going to change this one a little bit. Let's do F9. It selected the 20, hit plus, go to 50, made the signal smaller. And that's going to keep it a little bit cleaner, keep it from drifting and moving quite as much, actually. That and sitting still will do that, too. All right, now I'm going to hit F5 to begin. Oops. F5. There we go. So what you can see happening here is my brain's making brain waves. That's the top squiggle set. I'm still moving a lot, so I'm getting those little red lines through it. And whenever these signals allowed to pass through when I'm sitting still, makes you widen out that artifact reject. It is a little tight. So I am widening out the THR number. It's kind of moving around so much, up to 150. There we go. So now what you can see is the signals are getting picked up on the top squiggle, and then they're being filtered out into 3 different squiggles below: 4 to 7, 14.63, and then 17.63. That's really 0.25, but it abbreviates or rounds on the screen. And then 24 to 36. And all 3 of those bands, as frequency ranges, are getting measured. The second column over from the right is an average column, average microvolts. And so, for instance, I'm making 25 microvolts, 26 microvolts of theta, this 4 to 7 brainwave. And generally, you want to train down theta. So there's a few things going on that are helping me train that down to reduce excess theta. One, I've set my THR, my threshold, to 32. That means that there's these gaps, these lines right outside the waveform of theta that's being shown. And whenever my theta surges past it, it stops the game. So the beeps that you're hearing will pause. I also have that little screen there in the bottom right at eye line on a big TV. So I'm seeing a lot of visual activity and I'm hearing the beeps, but neurofeedback is largely involuntary. So I'm not trying to move my brainwaves. So that's the 4 to 7. Then we have 14.625 to 17.625, rounded up a little bit on the screen. And that's a reward band. You can see it says RWRD under it. And I'm making 8.5 microvolts of beta. And I want to make more. So I put my threshold under it. It's 6 and change. You can see THR says 6.35. And now whenever my average stays above my threshold, a little green line gets painted through the trace, meaning I'm in range. So when you have a green line and no red lines, it'll let the game run. And on this game, what'll happen when all 3 bands are in range, it'll beep. It'll give you a little fleck of white on the middle of the road. This is called highway, this game. And the metaphor is you're in a car looking out the back like you're a little kid in the 70s, watching the highway unspool behind you. And those little white bricks that are showing up in the middle divider of the highway, those are being created with every beep. And we also get a star in the sky with every beep on this game. Now it's giving me a 10-second rest. So what's driving the beeps as well, aside from just the raw amplitude, is the little boxes in the screen. So the blue bar that's nice and wide, that is tied to my beta amplitude, my 8 microvolts, once I stop moving. So the amount of beta you can see on the screen, it's the width of my beta brainwaves. And then my theta brainwaves, the ones I want to train down, I'm moving too much here. Let me move my amp to a little closer. There we go. And then my theta, which is right now 16 microvolts, is tied to the size of the purple box. So I can get a visual cue that I'm getting distracted or tired if the purple box swells up really big. Or I get a visual cue that I'm moving too much if the whole visual system goes away, like right now. You can see the traces are not valid. They're popping all over the place. That's not EEG. That's like movement or something. The wire might be loose. Let's see. That's better now. All right, so some great questions. Let me take a minute and answer here for you guys. Scroll up. You're being so prolific. That's awesome. El Chatterino talks about protocols. Okay, and then Joe Bar. Hey, Joe Bar. How will sequencing protocols compare to doing them 2 channels simultaneously? Great question. 2 weeks ago, I did a whole live stream on 1 versus 2 channel training you might want to check out. But essentially, the idea is that 1 channel protocols and 2 channel protocols are different. Just checking my signals here. The theory when you're creating these things is think about the individual tissues that you want to train individually in each segment of the protocol. Do the segments initially, get good effects in the segments, and then combine them if the combination makes sense. So like I'm doing today C3A1 and C4A2, and those combine really well. Those are homotopic or opposite side of the head sites. And we get really solid communication between them. So when you train the beta up on the left and the SMR up on the right, which I'm doing tonight, that's sort of their natural modes. They want to do that stuff. And so when you put them into a dual mode, you're not likely to get the right side picking up the ask to make more beta and the left side picking up the ask to make more SMR. Instead, you're going to get the left leaning into beta, the right leaning into SMR. And then there's this contingency between them. So you're training 2 things at once. They each get more training information, but they have to move together. So you start to create this relationship of support and stability between the locations you're training. And this is why you're not always able to train everything in a dual, because if 2 sites shouldn't necessarily have communication, or if the reward band for one of the segments is the failure mode of another segment, you wouldn't want to dual them necessarily. So while I've done it before, I don't like to dual anything with PZ, because PZ, back midline, has a healthy mode of making lots of alpha, and it tends to have failure modes in both excess theta and excess beta. And so if you do anything in the beta manipulation range with a dual at PZ, PZ wants to make beta too easily. And so you tend to get anxiety and things in the PZ if you dual it up. And it doesn't really have a need to be in combination with other circuits on the C strip. But you could put FZ minus PZ into the mix, or you could do FZ minus A1 and PZ minus A1 and do something in combination, or a dual where you're training different things on different locations based on what they might need, because you're leaning into the modes they already exist in and the communication between them that already exists. That's the real secret of two-channel training is, well, what is it doing? What parts of the brain are involved, and does the brain usually do that? And does it want to do that? And then you can kind of lean into this idea that you're building more of an effect, but you're also building sort of a relational contingent effect in associated parts of the dual protocol. I hope that made sense. El Chatarino is using his own setup. That's right. El Chat has some cool software he's been working on. Kurt Keeter says, who's the best patient you've ever had? Don't be concerned about recency bias. I mean, I have a lot of great clients. You're definitely some good ones. I categorically, I'll say, the best clients I have are the ones that are invested in their outcomes, that are reporting what they're noticing. They're telling us what they're experiencing day to day, whether or not it's from neurofeedback, and they get the sessions in and then rinse and repeat. And a lot of my clients are really, really good clients. I've worked in every aspect of human services and mental health you can imagine. And I've been doing neurofeedback for 25 years. Even now, neurofeedback still feels like I might be cheating sometimes, because people get so much change. Sometimes, not every time, but it can happen. Radar Ashwood has a question. Can SMR slow down with age like alpha? It does slow down a little bit. Yeah. Beta does in general. Sure. You get a reduction in amplitude and in frequency in beta with age. And the reduction in amplitude is a function of cell body loss. And the reduction in speed is a function of myelin loss. And these things happen over time. And you have this myelin building up. Myelin actually never ceases to be built, and we make it lifelong. But there hits a point at which the increased myelin can't overcome the oxidative stress on the myelin that's there and the reduced integrity of the cell bodies, and you get a dip in the beta and a slowing of the beta with age. It's not necessarily, God, these are really bad signals here. I'm going to clip the amp to myself. Maybe it's picking up my movement. You don't necessarily see SMR change with age, though, the same way you do with alpha, especially with younger people. Alpha is a frequency that matures. And so someone who's like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old has a very different speed alpha than somebody who's like 12 or 14. And so you have to kind of think about someone's native. Oh, there we go. That's working much better. You got to think about someone's native alpha speed and their age. And you can look at that with their eyes closed. PZ minus A1 linked to years alpha tells you their alpha speed. But often people will extrapolate that. There was this technique for a long time called the IORF, the individualized optimal reward frequency, that first started off in the traditional neurofeedback landscape. And then it moved into the infraslow training. And the reason is that the Othmers, Sue Othmer specifically, would find good effects training lower and lower and lower. And she kept doing that until she got below 1 hertz. But for a while, we were all trying to optimize every client's beta waves. We would look at their alpha like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, look at their alpha waves and say, aha, their alpha is half a hertz slower than typical. Therefore, their beta is going to be half a hertz slower than typical. Their theta is half a hertz slower than typical. That actually doesn't track. Beta especially, and the SMR frequency of beta even more so, doesn't mature into being. Even very early in life, you've developed enough cell connectivity and myelin to produce the beta frequencies you're going to produce later in life, for the most part. And for slow brain waves, you have an increased amplitude of slow brain waves when you're very, very young because of the skull thickness. And as the skull thickens up, the amplitude of the slow brain waves drops faster because it's a filter. It's a low pass filter. drops faster than the frequency of the high frequency brainwaves, or the amplitude of the high frequency brainwaves. So aging does do something. It's a little complex, and it's not actually like this inviolate phenomena. You'll see alpha slow down as well. It's a function of cell body loss, but it's also a function of speed of processing driven by sleep and fatigue and other things. So the brain remains pretty young for a long time. And even if you're 70 years old, you're still making 600, 700 new brain cells a day, new neurons a day. So it's really a much more plastic process, even late into life, into our 70s, 80s, et cetera, than we may have believed as recently as 10 or 20 years ago. Okay, so it finished the first stage. I'm going to move this wire over. So first thing I'm going to do is swap the reference in the ground because this is an A1, not an A2. There we go. And then I'm going to move the wire from the left side of my head, C3, to the right side of my head, C4. Let's make sure these are roughly symmetric. There we go. Joe Barr is saying, it seems counterintuitive to me that where the thresholds are set, i.e. for reward, I would have thought you'd put thresholds higher than average to influence average to move closer to threshold. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, one of the things that's important to know about eager is that the inhibit and the reward label affect the directionality of the thresholds. So you can think of once I put it back on, it'll go to 5% for the inhibit. The inhibit of theta will have a 25% percentage in a minute. Right now it says 3% because there was no signal. And it adjusted. There we go. What's going on in terms of that is that the inhibit and the reward are in opposite directions. So let's say 20% inhibit is the same as an 80% reward. If you look carefully, you can see that the traces have a strike through color, and the strike through color red when it's an inhibit band only happens when it's going outside the threshold. And and then the same thing when the reward goes outside, when it grows in amplitude, that's when it creates the past condition. But you could have all these things coded differently. Like in BioExplorer, it's really common to set it up where you have instead of a 25% inhibit for the inhibit band, you have an 85% reward or something, 75% reward. So as long as you're getting the percentages proper and the directionalities proper, what you label it is much less proper or much less important. Let me start this off. F5, signal quality is pretty good. Actually, very good. So word to the wise, hang the U-Wiz on yourself. It works a lot better than sitting on your knee. Let me get my signals. Oh, it's also not, you can see we can barely see the raw trace now because I have a smaller amplitude signal on that right-hand side. So let me scale it. Let's see, function F9. There it is. Scale it down to 20. And then I'm going to get rid of some of the noise just by cutting. And here where it says THR, it doesn't mean threshold. It means artifact rejection threshold, not reward threshold or anything. That's good. We'll leave it at 100. Cool. And then F11. That'll work. And then F5 to begin. Had to hit F5 twice because I was still in the previous segment. So the first F5 will advance. The second F5 will begin. Radar Ashwood is saying, when neurofeedback practitioners talk about stabilization, what do they mean? Depends on what practitioner a little bit, what style of neurofeedback. Generally, they mean that generally talking about like infra-low, infra-slow, or interhemispheric stuff in an arousal model, you're talking about being able to help a brain learn to calm itself down when it wants. And you're often doing interhemispheric training. You also might mean stabilizing against seizures, raising the seizure threshold. But that term specifically is often used by old school arousal model people or newer people working in infra-low, infra-slow, who have this perspective that there's deeper things like energy management and how much anxiety you can handle without ramping up too much, that would be considered stabilization. And again, most of that is going to be targeted around like intrahemispheric, T3 minus T4, T5 minus T6, that kind of stuff, either with traditional phenotype training or amplitude training, as well as with the infraslow, subhertz stuff. They both use those intrahemispheric protocols for stabilization. Radar Ashwood's asking, what's going on in the brain of someone who is having a religious experience? Great question. There are some studies on that, and as far as we know, there are some areas in the temporal lobe that seem to create the sensation of being, one with the universe and hearing God and feeling love and all those things. There's a book, Gillian Jane's something language and the origin of the bicameral mind. And the idea is that the temporal lobe speaking to us, the non-dominant hemisphere especially speaking to us, may be the basis of religious writing. God speaking to you from on high and you write it down in the book may have been the non-dominant hemisphere, the non-language hemisphere essentially speaking to you early as we were starting to develop this more embodied language of the culture. It's an interesting book, Gillian Jane's. You should read it. I forget what the total title is. Language and the Origin of the Bicameral Mind, maybe, or Laterality. It's a great book, but I forgot the title. So on that note, there's been experiments looking at things called the God helmet, which will send a pulse of magnetism into the temporal lobe. And in some people, they've created ecstatic experiences. There's certainly a lot of evidence in the temporal lobe epilepsy, TLE, landscape, where TLE produces experiences of rapture as one of its symptoms sometimes. So I think we're dealing with temporal lobe phenomena, but we don't yet necessarily know where or why or how, but that's where it's at. Jehan, hi Jehan. If you mess up one segment of a series, say the ground comes loose, can you prevent the bad data from going to the session averages? If you lose the ground, you're going to lose your signal and you're not going to have any training going on. If you flip the two wires, the reference and the active, so to speak, for a lot of training, amplitude training, all you're doing is taking the waveform and flipping it upside down. So if your waveforms are clean enough to get good signals, you probably have a good setup if the wires are close enough to being in the right places. And you have about a centimeter from the perfect direction to get, centimeter in any direction for the perfect location. Kirk is asking, evidence for impacting outcomes with Parkinson's. I've worked a lot with probably the world's preeminent expert in Parkinson's with neurofeedback, Dr. Lisa Tatarin, who's in San Diego. She's had really good outcomes. I have too, generally. I used to hire her as a consultant when I had a Parkinsonian patient, and we worked on several people together, and she has a more comprehensive set of things she has people do, including addressing their gut. And she's also doing a lot of research around Parkinson's. I think she's working a little bit with the Michael J. Fox Foundation on that. So there's a lot going on in the landscape of Parkinsonian stuff and neurofeedback. Parkinson's is like autism in that there's like several different things we call Parkinson's. And doctors are not very good at diagnosing it. Not everyone gets diagnosed by a neurologist or a Parkinsonian specialist. So there's lots of Parkinsonian phenomena or Parkinsonian syndrome type things. And what I have found is there's a bunch of different outcomes that can be supported with neurofeedback. The biggest one is in younger people with Parkinson's in their 40s and 50s and 60s, often chemically induced or, some other major phenomena is going on. In those people, I've seen the progression slow way down or stop. And in those people and in elders with Parkinson's, I've seen a really lovely impact of the effective medication being changed. So one of the biggest issues, not biggest, but one of the things that people are frustrated by who have Parkinson's is if they need medication to sort of deal with the tremor and it's getting really bad, you may discover that you can't get enough hours out of a medication to have a night of sleep. And so people often wake up after 3 hours, take more medication, go back to sleep an hour later, and have this really, really impaired sleep from then on. And what I found often is that you can enhance the ability of the medication to land so people can stay asleep all night. And that actually has a follow-on effect of improving brain health. So I don't know why we impact Parkinson's so thoroughly with that phenomena and not, in any other like dramatic way. We can help it a little bit. I've helped people with rigidity, with tremor, with those sorts of things. There's definitely stuff you can do, but Parkinson's is kind of like a brain injury or other phenomena where once there's significant stuff going on, it can be harder to make a change. And once there's significant degradation, there's less tissue to work on. So for instance, with major symptomatic Alzheimer's, neurofeedback is not the first thing I think about. And if someone has had Parkinson's for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years with symptoms, I haven't had as much impact moving the tremor at all. But if someone is like younger, has had it for 5 or 10 years or 15 years, and they have a lot of like stiffness and rigidity and a little bit of tremor, we have really good results historically in, a dozen people max. So I haven't had a huge sample. I've had 3 or 4 people with another Parkinsonian phenomena called MSA, multiple systems atrophy. I forget what that stands for, but it's sort of like a non-specific Parkinsonian phenomena. It has lots of other things involved. And I've seen the same kind of impact there, where people get a reduction in Parkinsonian symptoms and an improvement in how strongly the meds feel and how well they last. So I think we can do something with the dopaminergic systems. I just don't think we can necessarily rebuild it once you've lost that much tissue. So that's why we're getting moderate effects, not like remediation of the complaint. So, in neurofeedback, we're very unsatisfied. Most of the things that this works for, it works for. And with every individual, it's a question figuring out how their brain works and what's going to work for them. But like, I don't ever question, is neurofeedback going to work for ADHD or even a seizure? It's just like figuring out what that person needs. But when somebody has a Parkinsonian phenomena, my confidence drops to about 50% that we're going to make significant change. And we make change in sleep and executive function and making the dopamine drugs work better. And that's a good effect. But, these people are still experiencing rigidity and other phenomena that aren't wonderful. So Radar is saying, how do I reconcile the contradictions between the arousal model and the mainstream way of training neurofeedback? I would say the arousal model is the mainstream way of training neurofeedback. The arousal model is neurofeedback. It's what people do. Whether or not they know it, that's the thing. The arousal model is in Loretta. It's in Neurooptimal. It's in SMR training. It is SMR training. It's in for low and for slow. It's in slow cortical potential training. That theory, the idea of that arousal model is built in, I think, to all of the style of neurofeedback. So I might not be really understanding what you're asking. Part of the arousal model when doing training is thinking about the tissue and the frequencies involved, and then using how somebody reacts afterwards to tune what you're doing. And I would argue that is actually the way neurofeedback should be done and is done when done best. And I would argue that half or 2/3 of the field still does it that way. That is the phenotype model. So the arousal model and the phenotype model overlap. One is looking at the valence of the individual, stress, attention, etc., as well as the after effects from the training, and using that to guide what you're doing. But traditional neurofeedback also uses QEEGs to figure out your starting places. And the starting places from the QEEG are informed by what you think about the arousal model. Someone has low alpha, they're over-aroused in that tissue. They have high beta, they're over-aroused in that tissue, So, or if the alpha is slowed or sped, these phenomena dovetail really well with a physiologically bound perspective on neurofeedback. And so I would say the arousal model, when done best, is among the most elegant ways to do neurofeedback because you combine the rigorous QEEG with the subjective perspective that is sort of symptom reduction and experience validating. So you kind of have to do both. You really need to both understand the physiology you're designing protocols for, and then use the changes in arousal, sleep, stress, anxiety, etc., to tell you how close you are in frequency and speeds, etc. And that's a pretty reliable way to train. I think that is the best way to train. And I don't think that even some of the more complex measures that take the clinician out of the mix, they're still making assumptions about the failure modes, the models within the different bits of tissue. So yeah, I don't think that an arousal model perspective is a replacement for starting off with QEEGs and doing periodic QEEGs. Not everyone that does this style training will use QEEGs. Many will who do SMR or phenotype training, but if you're doing infra-low, infra-slow, you're not usually using QEEGs. And so I think there's something left on the table when you go 100% into arousal. But I don't think that most of the field does that. I think only, really the infra-low, infra-slow people do that. And even in some of Mark Smith's landscape and SCP overseas, you'll see people occasionally do use QEEGs. So I guess that's my answer. Probably not a very elegant answer, but there it is, Radar, for you. All right. People say it's dangerous to train delta and theta, but they really train that low. Yeah. It's dangerous to train delta. It's not dangerous to train theta generally. It's contraindicated to reward theta if your theta is already high. And it's contraindicated to reward your theta if the beta is already high in the same location, because theta is disinhibitory, right? Delta, you don't need to train because it's there for a reason, generally. And if you work on the betas and the alphas and the thetas, the delta will take care of itself most of the time. There are some exceptions. You can train down delta and train up theta when doing alpha theta training, when your eyes are closed and on the edge of sleep. And now the delta down training is meant to prevent you from falling asleep. And the theta up training is more of the natural eyes closed sort of hypnagogic state you're trying to get into. So it's definitely dangerous to train delta willy-nilly. You can create seizures or release. You wouldn't create them, but you could release seizures if somebody's prone to them by training delta. And you can create lots of side effects by training delta as well. Lots of feelings of like fogginess or anxiety. So you don't need to train really anything below about 3 hertz ever, unless you're going below 1 hertz. And by the same token, you often don't need to train alpha between like 8 and 13. You can train other things to get out of the way. And the 8 to 13 hertz alpha, slow alpha or fast alpha, these things will rise to be better produced if you just get other brainwaves out of the way. So again, watch my video from 2 weeks ago, but there's the idea here is that you aren't just training a random system, you're training a system that has kind of rules and behavior itself. So think about where in the brain you're going after, and does it want to make alpha? Does it want to make theta? Like front midline theta tonically or chronically is never a good thing. Phasically it is, but you would probably never want to train up theta at FZ, because FZ has a couple of different modes of failure modes where it makes constant tonic theta. That's a problem. But PZ with your eyes closed can make theta. That's really a big deal. So it's really about what the tissue is meant to do, and you can sort of help it learn to do more or regulate better in that way. Radar, I was asking, did I miss question? Yeah, I did miss that question. I didn't see it. Question on cerebral palsy for earlier. Yeah, I didn't see that Radar. I might either missed it or maybe it got eaten by the YouTube gods. Let's see. Oh, I missed a couple actually. Hey Ryan, Miss Ryans. How effective is neurofeedback for treating adrenaline surges during a stressful situation, and any typical phenotypes correlate with this phenomena? Yeah. Think Vegas, right? What happens in the Vegas doesn't stay in the Vegas. The Vegas is tied in directly and indirectly to the cingulates. Look at your cingulates. You could be having surges of fast alpha, which creates a blood sugar type phenomenon, a cortisol surge, and that's at PZ. That can create an adrenaline surge or cortisol surge. You can also have a panic type phenomena, also at PZ. You could have a hyperfocus phenomena at FZ. These will drive the heart, the vagus, the gut. So Ryan, HRV biofeedback. And HRV is a skill, not a mode you move into. So practice with the HRV devices if you can get one, a HeartMath M-Wave Pro. Practice with it for 15 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week. Outside of the context of the stressful situation, learn to feel the state shift that you get from the HeartMath, and then reach for it when you're not sitting down in front of the machine. And learn to do that, and you'll be able to ride the sympathetic activation back into a more parasympathetic rest and repair, instead of adrenalizing up into fight or flight, hopefully. Something to try. Let's see. There was a question though about CP. I don't see that question, Radar. Maybe YouTube ate it. If you could tell me again. Yeah, Radar, I've scrolled all the way up and I don't see your CP question. If you're asking, does neurofeedback help CP? The short answer is sometimes. CP, like any other brain injury, is very unique to the individual. I've seen good reduction in seizure, executive function. I've seen changes in those two things are really the primary things, executive function and seizure. I've also trained a few different people with significant CP, like basically mostly paralyzed. And they didn't have much change. 2 people I'm thinking of they're both wheelchair bound, didn't have much change, either of them. But 2 other kids that had, one was in a wheelchair and one was not, both had more significant impairments in sensory and anxiety and seizures and cognitive. They both had stronger changes. It may be because the CP was one of the many diagnoses and not just the one thing. So I think that CP, like many other brain injuries, it depends on what is injured. And if it's tissue that's not meant to change later, it can be really hard to get change again, like in language or movement. So I think that was the question. Yeah. Moderate success, Radar, but case by case. And I'd be more confident talking about sleep and anxiety and seizure and attention in that population than I would about the motor and speech and other phenomena. So yeah, specific and focal brain injuries can be hard to move with neurofeedback. There are things that are emerging in the landscape of biohacking that can potentially do things for lots of stuff to bring up plasticity super strong. And I've seen amazing things in my 25 years plus of doing this work. But brain injuries, once there's significant loss of function, are very special because they remove the system that would meant to be improved. Where lots of other stuff, lots of psychiatric stuff, quote unquote, anxiety, attention, sleep, stress, speed of processing, cravings, seizures, migraines, these are regulatory phenomena. Language, visual fusion, those are not meant to change later in life, but attention, anxiety, sensory filtering, those are meant to keep tuning. And so this is part of why I think we get really good results with things like ADHD and seizures and sleep, and less good results when someone has a stroke that blew out their language area or something. So, yeah. Radar is saying, is the reason studies only show a 50% reduction in seizures primarily because studies don't do enough sessions? It was the Sturman's 2014 or so paper on seizure, looking at all the literature that came before, found that the average size across studies was 50%. And 5% of people have complete control over seizure. Probably though, yeah. Probably that if you did more work. I've never seen somebody get a result as poor as 50% reduction. I see most people get very strong reduction in seizure if they have significant seizures. With occasional seizures, it's not as clear, right? You can't tell necessarily if they're being reduced. But with chronic or constant seizures, you see really magical things. And again, that's really powerful for transformation support. So I'm not sure why, but I will tell you, Radar, people that are having seizures don't care about the studies. They just want neurofeedback. They've heard about it. They know somebody who's had seizure control, and they don't care if there's a 5% chance that they'll get any benefit. They want to try it. And people get really good results on seizures with neurofeedback usually. So it's a pretty big target for our technique. I wish more people in the epilepsy and seizure world knew about it and used it. It's Yes, it's impactful for ADHD and for trauma and for cravings for alcohol. And this is really, really important stuff. And those are huge regulatory goals that affect tons of people. But man, seizures are such a big deal. And neurofeedback it's actually a tool that changes how the brain can resist the seizure state. So if you're dealing with seizures and epilepsy phenomena, find a neurofeedback person, have someone look at your brain, do some neurofeedback. You'll be, I think, pleased. So. Radar, I did not see your biofeedback. Oh, here we go. I do see it. Yes. Sorry. I hadn't scrolled. How do you feel about finger temperature biofeedback and GSR biofeedback? Are they as good as HRV? No, they are not. They are useful for some things. Temperature biofeedback is good for headaches. Temperature biofeedback can be good for stress, and so can GSR for stress. But no, they're not as good as HRV biofeedback, because with GSR or hand warming, you're picking up a distal signal. You're not picking up the control signal itself. You're picking up a consequence. And so while you practice the mind states for biofeedback to change GSR, hand warming, etc., it's a very indirect and slow process, but the heart rate variability, very rapid. So if you can learn to just kind of trip over that state of dropping into the zone and that sympathetic, pullback and parasympathetic dominance, if you can do that with HRV biofeedback, it's much, much more obvious and strong, and you can learn to recreate it more voluntarily, where hand warming and GSR, you really got to put yourself in a state. And then you discover that can happen. But I don't think it's as shifting. I think hand warming, I don't think it does as much. Or GSR, I don't think it does as much for state shifts as the HRV biofeedback does. Just my experience. Well, cool, guys. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with me tonight. Here we are coming up on an hour, so I think I'm going to stop for the evening. But let me know your questions. Leave comments in the video later. If you're watching it later, please do me a favor and like and subscribe the video, or like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. And I will see you next week. I might dig into a research topic. I might do another Q&A. We'll see how far I get with preparing research for you. But until next week, you guys have a lovely